So, today we're going to be talking about one-step equations and trying to remember how to solve one-step equations. One-step equations, the key to solving equations, we want to remember the power of an equal sign. That means that whatever's on this side is exactly the same as whatever's on this side. And in general, when we're talking about one-step equations or solving equations in general, we have an expression and we know what it is equal to. And so when we talk about solving, we're trying to figure out what was x originally. So we're generally trying to undo whatever this number had done to that number. That's why we went over the order of operations yesterday. Generally, solving equations is the opposite of the order of operations. We go backwards. And so we have to think about what are our opposites when we are solving equations, because in order to solve an equation, I have to undo whatever this is doing to it. So when we think about opposites, another good math word for that is an inverse. So we're talking about inverses. The inverse of adding something is to subtract something. The inverse of subtracting something is to add something. So those are opposites of each other. Multiplication, when we think about multiplication, when we're talking about undoing multiplication, we're generally going to be talking about division. All right, so multiplication and division are going to be opposites of each other. So those are things that we want to keep in mind. Remember, when you're solving a one-step equation, you do want to keep your work neat. This is also a processing thing. If you can keep your work neat, if you can keep your thoughts ordered, making yourself write things down makes you keep your thoughts ordered. These are things that you can do very fast, and you're going to do them very fast. But if you start getting too fast, you start getting lost in the steps. So you just want to make sure you're making your brain keep things ordered. So when I look at this problem, if I want to solve for x, I need to get x by itself. So I need to get rid of whatever is with x. So I have to ask myself, what is the opposite of adding 5? The opposite of adding was subtracting. So that means that I need to subtract 5. But if I do it on this side of the equation, I have to balance it out and do the same thing. Whatever's on this side, I'm taking 5 away from it. So whatever's on this side, I have to take away 5 from it. And that way, they'll be equal to one another. So when I do that, 5 minus 5 cancels out. And all I'm left with is x. On this side of the equal sign, notice I kept my equal sign lined up. I've got 8 minus 5, which is equal to 3. So that means that x is equal to 3. They can do this in all kinds of orders. You know, sometimes the number that it's equal to is on this side. 18 is equal to x minus 7. So if I'm doing this problem, I'm still trying to solve for x. So I need to do the opposite of minus 7. The opposite of minus 7 is going to be plus 7. So if I add 7 on that side, I have to add 7 on this side. When I do that, I get 18 plus 7, which is 25. And my equal sign stays where it is. And then x stays where it is. And negative 7 plus positive 7 is 0. It goes away. And so that leaves me with that x is equal to 25. If I have something like 3x is equal to 15. Don't forget, when a number is written in front of a variable, that is implying multiplication. That 3 is being multiplied by x. I don't have to have a dot there. I don't have to have parentheses. I can have a dot, or I can have parentheses, but it doesn't have to have one. And so then that means that this is multiplication. So I have to ask myself, what is the opposite of multiplication? Division. So if I'm going to divide this side by 3, I have to divide this side by 3. Do not assume that answers are always going to turn out to be whole numbers. In this case, it did. But you will have fractions for answers sometimes. You just need to make sure that you reduce your fractions, okay? Don't be scared, though, if you get a fraction answer. Just because it's a fraction answer does not mean that it is wrong. Also, don't forget that we can write division in a couple of different ways. Sometimes you'll see problems where we have x divided by 8 is equal to 2. But you might also see that as x over 8 is equal to 2. So we can write division in two different ways, but they both mean the same thing. I have to ask myself, what is the opposite of dividing by 8? The opposite of dividing by 8 is to multiply by 8. So if I multiply one side by 8, I have to multiply the other side by 8. If I multiply one side by 8, I have to multiply the other side by 8. There, the multiply times 8 and the divided by 8 cancel out. The divided and multiply cancel out. And so we are just left with x is equal to 16. So you can see division written in a couple of different ways. We also want to remember, we're going to go back to basic operations and solving equations. We need to talk about, generally we don't always see these just as straightforward equations. We're generally dealing with a word problem. So when you're dealing with word problems, there's certain words, it's about translating. And so we want to make sure we know what words go with what math symbols, so that we have everything associated the right way. So let's talk for a second about some of the different words that you might see pop up if you are dealing with an add situation. Addition. Some of the words that you see when you're dealing with addition might be some, more than, they do sometimes just say plus or add. These are some of the more common ones. The sum of, 3 more than, 3 plus, added 3. Those are some of the common ones. Subtraction words. Words for subtraction. Difference. So if you see difference, it could be less than, 3 less than, minus, take away, subtract, for the obvious one. These are words that you might see for that. Multiplication. So when you're dealing with multiplication, words that might pop up to mean multiplication, times. 3 times as many. Twice. Now there's a word, twice. You know, he sold twice as many of something. Don't forget, twice means 2 times. So it is a word that hides the number and the what's actually happening. So twice would be 2 times. So that's a multiplication one. Double. If you saw something like double, that would also mean 2 times. So some of the words can even hide the number and what you're supposed to do with it. Product. The product of 2 numbers. That would be to multiply. And times is the big one. The times, twice, double, triple would be 3 times. Quadruple, 4 times. I don't think I usually see much bigger words than that in there, but these are words that can mean multiplication. Division. All right. So if we're dealing with division, of course, we've got divide. We have quotient. Half. Let's divide by 2. You know, a third or a fourth. Any of those types of fractions are just dividing by that number. And divided into any of these words are things that you want to watch out for. And these are usually the ones students remember. I also want to point out, though, that the equal sign has several words that are built in. The big one is. When you see is in a word problem, is almost always the equal sign. Because if something is something, it is the same as something. It is equal to something. That's what is means. He is Matt. That means that that person over there is the same thing as Matt. That is his name. You know, is the equal sign. So when you see that is, it's going to be the equal sign in your equation. the numbers and the words, and sometimes they give you a variable, sometimes they don't give you a variable. But these are all the things that you want to remember as far as translating words in a word problem to an actual equation that you can solve. So I wanted to throw these out there at you as a reminder as well.